I have a new book out, more on that later. We have two contradictory conundrums that dominates our everyday lives. The first is that our society revolves around forms we all hate. No one in the history of the world has been happy about the prospect of filling out a form. And yet they're everywhere, all around us, all the time. Tax forms, those clipboards at the doctor's office, even ordering a pizza. You can't sign up for a service, get a driver's license, or even play a video game without first filling out a form. The second is our federal government. The United States federal government is one of the single largest organizations on the planet, continually solving some of the hardest organizational and logistical challenges yet devised by man. Yet this same organization is thought to be comprised of the slowest, dumbest, laziest workers the country has to offer, with government employees being the punchline to many a joke. What do these two things have to do with one another? And how does one of the most complex organizations yet devised continue to function in a society defined by the lowest common denominator? Let's talk about transactional bureaucracy. Having worked with the federal government for entirely too long, I can assure you I've dealt with more forms than you'd have thought possible. There's your SF-50 notification for personnel action, your SF-52 request for personnel action. No idea what happened to SF-51. Seriously, I've tried Googling it. I don't think it actually exists. Then you got your OF-1164s, your OF-306s, and your SF-15s. These are all real, by the way, and I deal with them on a daily basis. Also, SF just means standard form, and OF means optional form. Why do we need two distinctions? No clue. I mean, aren't all forms optional? I have stared at more boxes and drop-down menus in PDFs than I ever care to remember. Clearly, I don't like forms any more than you do. So why am I defending them? Well, first, you don't hate forms because you have to fill them out. You hate forms because they're badly designed, requiring you to fill in boxes you either don't understand or don't need. And second, because as badly designed as they tend to be, the form itself is actually super useful. All of modern existence depends on it. I'm no archaeologist, anthropologist, or language expert. You have to go to Dr. Crawford's channel for that. But I think it's widely accepted that writing started because of agriculture, as the records of livestock and crop outputs for tax purposes, i.e., a form. A form, no matter its purpose, is a way of recording and organizing information in a way that is easy to interpret and thus process. That's why they are broken down into sections and boxes to a seemingly granular degree. You may hate checking every box or filling out every line, but doing so is vital for keeping the machinery of government moving. Let's say you're an insurance claims adjuster and you need to report all of the livestock within a farm. You might write something like this. The McDonald Farm, located in rural Missouri, possesses 2 barns containing 6 cows each. It has 1 coop with a variety of chickens and geese. It has 2 ponds, 1 stocked, and 4 pigs in a newly built pig pen. This report contains all the requested information in a logical, orderly manner. But it is up to me, the reader, to parse that information and organize it. Compare that to a form. This form contains the exact same information, but it can be read and understood at a fraction of the speed. This is because the first report requires the reader to parse data and narrative. We have to extract the data from the paragraph before we can actually analyze it. Unlike the second report, where we are only presented with data and no extraneous details. It may seem like a small distinction, but if you're the USDA analyst back in DC, which version would you rather deal with all day? Which would make your job both easier and faster? Let's talk about a more personal example. Resumes. We all hate it when a company asks us to upload a resume, only to turn around and ask us to enter all of that information again. What gives? Well, try Googling how to format a resume. None of them are to the same standard. Now we're back to parsing data before we can analyze it. When you fill out the form on their website or whatever, all of that information feeds into databases that computers can easily analyze, sort, and process. And it's not just computers. It's a lot easier for the HR specialist to see your qualifications and experience in the computerized version generated by those forms than trying to read your goofy resume. So the obvious question is, why ask you to upload one at all? Well, that is actually to help you. Forms, as useful as they are for data processing, can strip away nuance or narrative, unfairly penalizing you in the application process. An uploaded resume gives you a chance to show your skill and professionalism to the hiring manager reviewing the applications. How you format and construct the resume is part of the test. Again, we see a situation where it may appear tedious at first, but the breaking down and organizing of information allows us to parse and process information far faster. So what does this have to do with the federal government? This is part of a phenomenon I've come to call transactional bureaucracy. See, I started with the government way back in the halcyon days of 2016, and I was immediately frustrated by pretty much all of it. I couldn't go 2 feet, accomplish even the most mundane of tasks, or, and I'm not making this up, get a light bulb changed without filling out a stupid form. Back when I worked in hotels, if we needed to hire a new front desk agent, we just emailed Vanessa and said, "Hey, we'd like to hire a new front desk agent." She would handle everything else, from the job posting to the combing through resumes and ultimately setting up interviews without me lifting a finger. If I needed a light bulb changed, I could just get on the walkie-talkie to maintenance and say, "Hey, when you get around to it, there's a light bulb in the lobby that's out." Done deal. In the government, each of these tasks required paperwork. Light bulbs weren't a big deal. I just logged on to the building's page and submitted a ticket. One short form asking for location and issue type later, and the light bulb would get fixed. Hiring, however, is an entirely different beast, one I discuss in detail in Rebuilding the Executive. And everything in the government works that way. You need to order new pins? There's a form for that. You need a lock on a classified safe replaced? Form. Performance appraisal? Form. Travel voucher? Form. Relocating from one desk to another? 3 forms. One for the person, one for the phone, and one for the computer. I wish I was joking. Sounds like a nightmare, and believe me, it is. Please buy my books so I can escape it. But the thing is, the more I work in these beige hallways of countless forms, I realize it kinda has to work that way. The federal government is impossibly huge. Trillions of dollars a year, millions of employees, and a literally unknowable amount of agencies and programs to keep track of. And you may wonder how an organization that large actually works. The obvious joke being that it doesn't. And yet, Social Security checks still go out, soldiers still get paid, beef still gets inspected, TSA agents are still there to make sure you take your belt and shoes off. For the longest time, I assumed this worked through simple inertia, a stumbling giant carried forward by its own momentum. But the longer I work in the government, the more I realize it has nothing to do with momentum at all. It has to do with all those forms we hate and the transactional nature our bureaucracy has adopted. Pop quiz. How do you solve an impossibly big problem? By breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces. How do you move a mountain? One rock at a time. Every conceivable thing in the government is a transaction. From wars to diplomacy to food stamps, education grants, and the launching of spaceships, it's all broken down into 100 little steps. Each singular step being no more complicated than a basic transaction, no more difficult than handing over money at a cash register. Each of these tiny microscopic transactions combines into larger and larger operations. This is the same exact way your computer works. While it may appear like magic, it's actually controlled by millions of switches, each capable of only a single action, an on or an off. a 1 or a 0, as simple as swiping a credit card. It is through these basic processes that your computer is able to render Minecraft and the government is able to move literal armies around the globe. Let's jump back to hiring for a second. It should be a very simple task. After all, we all do it every day. But there's a surprising amount of complexity to it. If I'm a hiring manager looking to hire a new employee and you're the HR specialist who's going to help make that happen, we need to do the following things. Write a position description and a performance plan, draft a job announcement based on that PD, review all 3 documents, figure out the salary level, determine the skill and experience requirements, post the job announcement for a specific period of time, close that job announcement, review all of the resumes, identify candidates to interview those people, make a selection, inform HR of the selection, and finally give someone an offer. Now, I want you to imagine it's 2 o'clock on a sweltering, swampy DC afternoon, and I send you an email. Hey, Vanessa, we want to hire a new management and program analyst. Thanks. You're going to think about the colossal amount of crap you now have to do and are not going to be very happy about it. It's enough to make you groan in frustration and want to take a break rather than get started. So we break it down into transactions, one at a time and as simple and small a step as possible. I email HR saying I'd like to hire a management and program analyst at the GS11 level. That's a transaction. HR emails me back with 3 draft PDs, and that's a transaction. When I send the email approving one of those PDs, transaction. When HR uses that to draft the job announcement, transaction. Me approving that job announcement, transaction. The posting of the job announcement, transaction. The reviewing of the applications, transaction. Scheduling of interviews, conducting interviews, making the selection, transaction, transaction, transaction. These aren't merely steps in the process, they're interactions between 2 components that need to work together in order to accomplish the larger goal. And it is like this throughout the entire federal government. How do you think NASA puts a rocket ship in space? They reach out to a contracting officer, transaction, who assigns a core, transaction, who prepares a statement of work, transaction, that is then solicited, transaction, and bid on, selected, and approved, transaction, transaction, transaction. Each one broken down into their simplest possible form, and to the smallest step available to make them easier and faster for both parties to process. This is basically an assembly line, but one with a very important distinction. Assembly lines are linear and generally at a fixed place. You don't need to know how an entire car is built. You just need to know, here's where I put these 4 bolts in order to attach a door. All I have to do is stand here and doors will come down the conveyor. And as long as I stand in this one place and do this one thing, I can attach 400 doors a day. But the government is a much different and larger beast. We have to work dozens of assembly lines, making hundreds of individual products simultaneously. We have a dozen tasks coming at us from every direction, many of which require different skill sets, institutional knowledge, and practical experience to accomplish. Filling out travel reimbursements, securely disposing of classified information, and hiring new employees are radically different tasks that not only have their own processes and risks, but are governed by entirely different legal and ethical regulations. And yet, I did them all in the same position, as a GS9 no less. I was able to because even though they were happening at the same time, I only ever had to worry about one step in the process, one transaction in front of me, one individual stone rather than the entire mountain. Thus, it's less like being a worker on an assembly line and more like a switchboard operator. None of us have an hour to carve out and handle the entire task from start to finish. But we don't need to, because in order to complete each process, we only ever have to worry about the switch in front of us, and whether that switch has to be on or off. It's the opposite of the stumbling giant. The government doesn't continue to function because of inertia and mass carrying it forward. It continues to function because you only have to worry about one tiny interaction at a time. If I dump a huge, complicated task on your desk on a sleepy Friday afternoon, it ain't getting done that day. It's probably not getting done on Monday either, which means we've wasted 3 whole business days simply because the task was so daunting you didn't even want to start. But if we have the same situation and all you have to do is send an email or fill out one 30-second form or read a document and give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, well, now things get moving. In the first scenario, you give up and go grab a snack because you don't want to deal with it. But in the second scenario, you can complete the task and then get a snack guilt-free because your workload is clear. And sure, the next step in the transaction will soon be coming to your inbox, but that's a half an hour from now. That's a problem for future you. There's one last point I want to make before we wrap up, and that's the idea of government workers being lazy or stupid. Now, I've said before that does not match my experience with government workers. The people I've worked with throughout the federal government continue to be some of the hardest working people I've ever met. But let's say it is true. Let's imagine for a moment that government workers are the dumbest, laziest slobs the country has to offer. That's actually a good thing. You see, the government has to account for the lowest common denominator on both sides of the counter. Yeah, your average taxpayer ain't too bright themselves. Both in who is filling out the form and who has to process the form, each side of the transaction has to be designed for the dumbest possible person. The brilliance of the government is that it continues to function no matter the level of stupidity on either side of the counter. And it's because of this transactional nature. Let's say you want to buy milk. You go to a food store, you see a big sign that says milk. You take the milk to the people at the front of the store. They scan it, a number pops up, you give them some currency, they put your milk in a bag, and you leave with milk. It is a process so simple and so stupid, literal children are capable of it. I've worked in grocery stores and have been on both sides of that transaction. And let me tell you, it's just as easy on the opposite side of the counter. The government does the exact same thing. It has to, because the government has to function no matter how stupid or lazy someone is. It can fill entire agencies with people like me, a high school dropout with no college experience, and accomplish everything from the international highway system to putting an adorable robot on Mars, because it figured out how to break down these monumental tasks into transactions so small they can fit in boxes on a form. The government works because when you walk up to that counter, when you apply for that program, when that nature reserve needs to get built, the individual worker doesn't need to know every piece of information and nuance in your personal case. All they have to worry about is the next box on the form, the next step in the process. If you think about it, even basic government functions look like daunting logistical nightmares. But by breaking things down into simple transactions, no one person involved in that function has to engage with the entire system. They only have to interact with one tiny piece of it. They only have to send an email or process a form, to turn a switch on or off, or hand over money at a cash register. And ultimately, that's what makes sure your disability check goes out, your fighter jets get made, your highways get maintained. And that, at least to me, is a good thing, even if the forms are annoying. I'm Michael Aguero. Thanks for watching. I have a new book out. It's called A Fascist Love Story. Maybe you read the description before freaking out about the title. It's a romantic tragedy that you can pick up on Amazon Kindle or Google Play. Every bit helps support the channel and encourages me to make more of these. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.